Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to all the dignitaries, all the governors, all the mayors, our colleagues from international organizations, our colleagues from the cities across Africa, and our dear friends from around the world for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us today, this afternoon, at our Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress, the first time that it is brought to you live in partnership with the government of Rwanda and the city of Kigali and RALGA, the local government association of Rwanda. So we're very, very happy to bring this session to you, which is the second session just today on connecting nature and climate and finance. And in this session, called An Investment Case for Nature's Benefits in Dar es Salaam, we are going to focus on the city. We're going to zoom in into the city of Dar es Salaam, a rich coastal city in Africa, rich in resources and opportunity and potential, and people and culture, and of course, nature. And we're going to look at how we can make nature work for the people of Tanzania, the people of Dar es Salaam, and of course, the economy of that city and that country. So we are very, very happy to be with you. My name is Kobe Brandt. I'm the Regional Director of ICLEI Africa and the Deputy Secretary General of ICLEI. And of course, this session is proudly made possible and is here with us today because of a fantastic project. It's called Interact Bio, and it's actually more than a project, it's a program spanning 3 continents. It's rolled out in Africa and in Tanzania, but also in India and also in Brazil. And it also links with cities in Europe. It's made possible, Interact Bio, by generous support from the German government, specifically the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy of the German government through the ICI program. So through the ICI program and support from the German government, we are able to invest in this project, Interact Bio. It's its 4th year now. We've been there working on the project for 4 years in these different cities, in these different countries, on 3 different continents. And now today, we're focusing on one of the key deliverables of this project. It's a project focused around mainstreaming nature and nature-based solutions into development planning and to shaping the economies of the countries in which the program is rolled out. Of course, all linked to climate resilience, building climate resilience, and finding nature-based solutions for addressing climate as well. So with that background, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the program and the run of show. The aim today is to focus, as I said, on this particular deliverable in the program. It's to develop an investment case for nature's benefits in the city, the great city of Dar es Salaam. And we're going to do that through a facilitated discussion with 3 panels, really. We're going to start off with our expert investment specialist, Mr. Martin Janssen van Vuren, who's going to give us an overview of this particular investment case we're discussing today in Dar es Salaam. And then we're going to ask for panelists, groups of panelists from, firstly, the business and private sector, secondly, funding organizations, and thirdly, the local government, and specifically the government, the municipality of Ilala, which is one of the municipal councils within the bigger city of Dar es Salaam. Each panel group will be allowed to engage with questions from the floor. And we would like to point out to everybody attending in the auditorium that you are able to pose your questions, and those questions will be fed through to me and to the panelists. And we will not be able to get to all the questions, but we will endeavor to get to as many of them as possible throughout the session. And just in terms of house rules, I would like to remind all participants to stay muted to allow us to hear clearly the speaker at the moment, and then to turn their cameras off during the course of the session. But of course, when panelists speak, please do unmute yourself and turn your camera on. Participants are able to please post their questions, as I said, in the Q&A, question and answer box. And if you have any specific questions or problems, you can always go to the virtual platform, to the help desk, who will help you unblock any questions or issues you may experience during the course of the next 90 minutes that we have together. So now I would like to, without further ado, introduce our first speaker, Mr. Martin Jansen van Vuren. Mr. Martin Jansen van Vuren, who is the Managing Director of the advisory firm with the unusual and innovative name, I must say, I and Am Future Near Advisor. So the right person to look at future opportunities, out of the box solutions of how we can bring nature to the fore. And Martin is going to give us a quick overview of the investment case that we have been developing with our partners and the municipality and the government in the city of Dar es Salaam, specifically the municipality of Ilala. Then I think we're going to go to our first panel group, but without further ado, I'm handing over to Martin for his presentation. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Kobe, for that introduction, and good afternoon to all the participants and the colleagues that are joining us today for this presentation. I'm going to be sharing my screen in order to do the presentation. So I'm just doing that quickly. There we go. Right, so today, just a little bit of an introduction. Kobe has mentioned it in terms of the project and its origin from ICLEI, as well as then the support that was provided by the German government. I think what's important for today's presentation is that one of the needs identified through the project was to formulate an approach to compile an investment case. Now, that is to formulate that approach that could be used by others in order to attract multiple sources of funding for nature-based solutions. So I first just want to indicate to you in terms of the approach that we formalized for the investment case. And of course, there needs to be homage paid to various others that have done very good work and which we looked at and researched. ICLEI themselves, in terms of the Financing Climate and Energy Action, they've also compiled the thematic atlas of nature's benefits to Dar es Salaam, which we utilized particularly in the beginning to scan the whole of the city for different kinds of opportunities. And then also approaches like Rwanda et al., their practice-orientated framework for identifying economic instruments to enhance biodiversity and human livelihoods. We utilize this information, amongst others, in order to formulate the approach to the investment case. Our approach consists of 3 basic steps. And the idea was to really start with a very broad base as a step 1, to look at all of the potential opportunities and to have a systematic approach to that in order to then compile that down to a particular opportunity that can then be taken on and taken further to invest in. The approach includes looking at who are the providers, the beneficiaries, the degraders of the ecosystem services. Is there any gaps, any imbalances, any opportunities? And then how appropriate is that ecosystem service for the beneficiaries in the particular city? And then also looking initially at economic instruments, which later then gets refined in terms of that. So step 2 is really looking at the value proposition and the funding mechanism of that nature-based solution. And here, a value proposition is really looking at what are the benefits and the costs for a particular ecosystem service. And here the monetary value comes in. And it's not just the monetary value, but also you'll see later on when we talk about the benefits of this specific project, it's also the value, the non-quantifiable value that is being identified. In terms of the value proposition, also to look at, to demonstrate to potential funders. When we're looking at funders, private sector, public sector, that value needs to be demonstrated. So we make sure we do that in this particular step, and then looking at the specific mechanism to use. Step 3 is then based on that pre-work that has been done to compile the investment case. And for us, what we wanted to highlight is that the investment case really should speak to the entity that funds it, supports it, and champions it. And sometimes your champion is not necessarily your funder, and vice versa. So it really should speak to the various groups and in order to get their support. And it's a basic approach in terms of the usual layout of a project description, the organizational plan, the cost-benefit analysis, including a financial analysis, your risk assessment, market and communication strategy to all stakeholders, and then an implementation plan. So this is our 3-step approach, which we formulated. And then we applied that to the opportunities in Dar es Salaam. Now, the reason why we then decided to choose the project of rehabilitating the botanical garden in Dar es Salaam, it's a couple of key things. The botanical garden is located within the Lala Municipal Council. But in terms of that rehabilitation, it will connect not only the community of the Lala Municipal Council, but also the whole of Dar es Salaam with their natural heritage. It could serve as a nursery for mature projects and spices to be planted in the second phase of the project. And I'll talk about the green corridor just now. It's an idea in terms of a second phase, but the botanical garden is really the genesis of that wider project that could include a green corridor. It could serve as a base for the educational program, and more importantly, it could serve as a model for public-private partnership. And it's always easier to build something as big as the green corridor that we are planning on a model that already works. And that's just where we are looking to the rehabilitation of botanical garden to serve as that model for the public-private partnership. It's also to provide maximum benefits to local residents, and it's a case study, as was mentioned. There are, of course, many, many benefits to the rehabilitation of the botanical garden, ranging from an increase in tourism to creating recreational activities for residents, right through to the increase in land values, for example. If you're looking at living and have a property next to a beautiful green area, your land value is definitely going to be improving. And of course, there's other benefits of nature-based services, such as reducing the temperature, improving the air quality, and so forth, that can be looked at. In terms of the green corridor, this is what we were looking at as a second phase. We didn't do a full feasibility study on the green corridor, but the idea is to plant trees along specific corridors in Dar es Salaam. The botanical garden is basically at the heart of it, and that would serve as the model for the further development. And what this does is that, apart from the benefits that was just mentioned, it also creates corridors that makes the city far more walkable. And tourism in particular, there's walking tours that's being conducted at the moment, and that would just benefit far more in terms of having these corridors down to the fish market, having activities along Barack Obama Drive, and then linking that all with the botanical garden, which will then be rehabilitated. So what is exactly included in the rehabilitation? Really that the indigenous plants and particularly spices. In terms of spices, there's a lot that's actually being produced on the mainland. People sometimes associate Zanzibar more with the spices, but a lot of that is actually produced on the mainland in Dar es Salaam. Bringing that back, educating people around it, signage, garden furniture from recycled plastics. Here we're looking at recycling existing plastics. There is a project that was underway, and that's clearly linked into this project. Exhibits, local vendors. We're not talking about a lot, maybe 2 or 3 that will be hosted there in order to sell local food. And interpretation center will be upgraded. The nursing and compost facility, we agree that, look, there is limited space. These are not going to be massive, but they can be examples and case studies of what can be done. Educational program in order to get people involved in the botanical garden, get them educated on the importance of biodiversity. And then, of course, your marketing communication strategy for all kinds of events. And this space can definitely be used for events other than linked to biodiversity, cultural events, performance events, etc. This is just quickly give you an indication in terms of a closer layout, in terms of the site itself, and of course, its relationship with the museum right next door. And that's also an opportunity that we identified where the linkage to the museum could definitely be incorporated. I'm not going to go into great detail in terms of the financials, but what I want to highlight is that the detailed financial analysis was conducted. Because of the visitor numbers and the capital that is required, there are retained losses at the beginning of the project. But those are accounting losses. It's things like depreciation that which is into a loss. And then in terms of the cash flow, there's significant cash flow that we make sure in terms of working capital to put into the project so that that project, once the cash starts going, could be sustainable. And this is the project that we wanted to have a look at in terms of that the project is sustainable. And this is the cash flow line. And you can see it becomes, it's a strong growth and proper growth. So financially, making sure that it's sustainable. In terms of funding requirements, we're not looking at a lot of money, $120,000 US. And that includes your pre-opening expenses, things like marketing before you open, rehabilitation, and then working capital just to pay salaries in the initial period until the cash flow starts to flow. And we're really looking at 42,000 visitors, and those visitors are both local residents as well as foreign visitors. So these were projected in the pre-COVID days, but we do believe that the world will eventually return to its pre-COVID levels. So within 2 years or so, we'll be back to those kind of levels. Different kinds of economic instruments for the private sector to get involved in, cash donations, donations in kind, and also contribution of skills and expertise, which is in the private sector. From public sector, things that we suggested, concessions of tax, water, electricity payments. But that's not necessarily all. One of the things that we do include in the report, and it's a publication that was compiled by ICLEI with others, is a climate finance decision-making tree. And it provides interesting decision-making situations in terms of for local and regional governments to ask themselves in terms of specific questions. And based on those questions, there are then different kinds of options in terms of financing tools. And as you can see, there's quite a significant number of financing tools available to local governments and regional governments based on whether their own situation is. If they don't have their own source financing, for example, what does it take to get external financing and what are the options? So there are things that local governments could do. Risks really relates to in terms of the buy-in and obtaining of funding. Other things can be mitigated. We've been very conservative in terms of our cost estimates, our income and demand projections. So, but it's really about stakeholder buy-in and obtaining that funding for the project that is critical. And in order to ensure that we do that, what we did was then to look at the institutional model. And we're recommending the establishment of a non-for-profit private company. This company would then employ a project manager and administrator, which will drive the process. So these two people are critical in terms of driving the process, but the process will then be overseen and advised through a board of 7 representatives, including the Lala Municipal Council, and then representatives from both public and private sector. And so in terms of these representatives, they should really be people that have an influence on the project and that can contribute to the project. So in terms of that, that's exactly how we see then how this could potentially be brought to reality. And I think that is my time. And I thank you all very much in terms of the opportunity in order to present. And I hand back to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I have so many things I'd like to say to this, but we need to go to the panels. Let me just say one thing, that, you know, new isn't always better. And this came out in our panel just before this as well, where a very senior representative from the FAO actually mentioned that sometimes what's right in front of you and what's obvious is the right thing to do. And maybe the old way of looking at nature is maybe the best way. So we don't always have to do everything new. So investing in something that exists and really bringing it to its full capacity, and really actually telling the world that the spices also are on the mainland, and you know, those sorts of things. These are true gems, and I think the city of Dar es Salaam can be very, very happy with the work that you have done. And thank you very much for all the many months that you've put into this work, with walking the streets, talking with so many people. We are now engaging, of course, throughout this investment case, there's been intensive engagement across the city of Dar es Salaam and with many other international and national role players as well. But we're now turning to our first panel for their reactions to what Martin has presented. Our first panel, as I mentioned, is from the private sector and business, represented here by Ms. Santina Benson, who's the Executive Director of the Tanzanian CEO Roundtable, and then also Ms. Tanya Hamilton, who's the Director of Nabaki Africa Limited, and also the Director of a very active NGO, much loved Nepefajo NGO, which is doing amazing work in the streets of Dar es Salaam, improving the lives of citizens across the city. So to both of you, I would like to start with Santina. Each of you, in about 5 minutes, just give us your immediate responses to the investment case and provide us with your insights as a representative of the CEO Forum to what you've been presented with. And let's also bear in mind what Martin presented was a zoom in on the botanical garden, but he also showed us the green corridors and the actual connection that can be made in a whole precinct of the great city of Dar es Salaam. Thank you, Santina. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kobe, and thank you, Martin, for an excellent presentation and setting the stage, and good afternoon, everyone. So maybe by way of introduction, just briefly, that representing about 150 CEOs who are doing business in Tanzania. And maybe just to give some context to what the private sector has been doing here in Tanzania, if we maybe shine a microscope, is that about 4 years ago, our members recognized the need for adoption of a biodiversity agenda. At that time, we weren't sure what that would be or what it would look like, but I was given a firm mandate from the members that as private sector leaders, we really needed to engage in the area of biodiversity and make sure that we could see our contribution. Now, it sounded simple enough, but I think if I share the journey that we've been on, it hasn't been as straightforward, and maybe this can lend itself to even enhancing the investment case for Dar es Salaam as well. So whereby we started with looking at what would have most impact, and initially we were looking at water. And whilst we had such excellent, maybe champions, if we wanted to say, in terms of really saying that they wanted to get engaged from a CEO perspective, but that didn't necessarily translate into tangible action from our members. We really struggled in the first 2 years to really get the private sector engaged. It wasn't until we started looking at this from a slightly different perspective, looking at presenting a business case for the adoption of biodiversity. That's when we really started to gain some traction. And I'll explain a little bit what, in terms of what that meant. Whereas before, when we were engaging in biodiversity purely with our members, we were almost presenting a case that it's your obligation to do so, not necessarily as a business, but as a leader. You really must adopt biodiversity. And that just wasn't sufficient, but once we started looking at why it makes business sense to adopt biodiversity, that's when we started to see some different views in terms of how this could be done. So since then, we've actually changed our agenda. It's no longer business and biodiversity, it's now business and sustainability. And it really focuses on looking at what are private sector companies already doing? How do we map this against the global stage in terms of whether it's SDGs and linking it with sustainability reporting? And it's still in its nascent stages, even though it's 2 years in, because we find that whilst we have 150 CEOs, but they're all sort of against a very broad spectrum. Some are engaging from an HQ perspective internationally and being guided by HQ in terms of what agenda should be adopted here locally, which doesn't necessarily align with local initiatives. And then we also have about 50% who are sitting in the SME space and maybe are struggling with capacity. So how do we bridge that gap? So really looking at how we can help enhance a deeper understanding of business and sustainability within the private sector, and recognizing that that may mean different things for different organizations. So if we bring it back to the investment case for investing in Dar es Salaam, I think this is where maybe we can have a deeper dive into how this engagement or this initiative could actually impact the private sector companies. And I'll give a couple of quick examples. In CBD, we see that there's a lot of private sector companies, large corporates actually, who have been in buildings now for 20 years plus. These buildings were designed really without necessarily thinking about the employee population, in that there is some challenges with where do you go to eat, where do you find 15 minutes to take a break. And a lot of these companies are actually in very close proximity to the botanical gardens. So how do we leverage on that? And this is where presenting a business case to the private sector can really come in, whereby one, it's a sustainability agenda from an employee perspective, but also a sustainability agenda in terms of biodiversity overall. And then one critical area where I think this project could possibly have greater impact is ensuring that the private sector companies can clearly see the long-term impact and the sustainability element. So if I look at a couple of things that Martin had touched on, so for example, the value proposition I think is very, very important. How are you presenting this to a private sector company? If we're purely looking at it from a CSR perspective, it can have a short-term gain in that maybe this year we'll have a lot of CSR funding from a number of private sector companies, and that may not be the case next year. And maybe their focus has changed to another CSR initiative, whether it's education, et cetera. There's so many. So rather than focusing on CSR funding, really changing the conversation and looking at what is your sustainability agenda? How are you reporting on that sustainability? We're seeing more and more CEOs now being taken to task, not only on financial performance, but also on sustainability performance. So how do we harness that and making sure that we can align this very excellent initiative in terms of them finding a sustainable way to participate, whether it is actually through cash donations, donations in kind, or even skills. Now just bringing it back finally, maybe I guess I think I may have gone over, but my last comment on skills could be that how do we look at adopting some of the skills that are already within the corporations? How do we make it sustainable? Is there a way that they can also report that corporate affairs, for example, has given X amount of employees to support the initiative going forward? So there's a number of creative ways that we could engage the private sector companies, but I think we need to just rework, is it CSR or is it sustainability? And of course, for me, it was a clear answer that it must be sustainability.
Thank you.
Maybe if I pause there, Kobe, and hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Santina. Thank you for those comments. And completely agreed. This is way beyond CSR. CSR is important and it will always have its space. But what we see here, and I'm glad you highlighted it, you know, and the pandemic, the COVID pandemic has brought it to the fore, where the world was locked away from nature. And people in New York, people in London, they didn't have access to their open parks as they're accustomed to. And it really had such a fundamental impact on them. I'm speaking with many of people in the parks field, and they see such a phenomenal link between health and well-being and quality of life. And here I'm talking about physical health and mental health and community health and just quality of life. If there is a safe, open park for people to access, or green space that people can access during their day, for people to be in nature, touch nature, feel nature, and just be there. You know, the health benefits, the mental health benefits are just phenomenal. And I think, yes, I love the city of Dar es Salaam. And I think such a park can become a real beacon of calmness and spiritual renewal also for the people who are working in the CBD, who are working in those buildings. So thank you for pointing that out. There's much more we can unlock here and take the discussion further. But let's go to Tanya. Tanya Hamilton. Tanya, you are a very, very well-known businesswoman, very committed businesswoman in the city of Dar es Salaam, and also investing in your NGO, Nepafagio. What are your perspectives of what you've heard today, and how you've been engaged with us for a long time? How do you feel about making such investments in the city?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Santina, for all of your inputs, and a lot of what I have notes to talk about, you've touched on as well. So I would just like to say that I always say that you can't change what you don't know or what you don't contemplate. And so often people are just so busy with the busyness of business that they don't sort of think outside of that. And so what I really wanted to push here is, how does one start to fall in love with nature in the city and realize how important it is? So to me, it's a no-brainer. I came to Tanzania in 1994, so 26 years ago, and started ICLEI Africa with my husband. So Dar es Salaam's changed a lot. We were 1.5 million people in the city back then. We're now hitting 6 million. So obviously there's going to be, you don't have to be a scientist to see the correlation between rapid urbanization and increasing environmental degradation and biodiversity. So I founded my NGO, my environmental NGO, not as a typical tree hugger. I didn't start out life in the NGO world, but as a seasoned businesswoman whose experience and research made me become an advocate for the sustainability revolution. Now, just as the tech age, the internet, globalization evolves the way we've all evolved doing our businesses, so too must the environmental crisis. And this is where now we've got to look at the private sector as a whole in Tanzania. And the first hurdle is understanding what is their awareness and how do they see things? Are they still stuck in what I call 20th century capitalism, which is all about shareholders and profit, no matter what the expense, it's all about profit and short-term thinking? Or have they woken up to what now is deemed the 21st century capitalism, which is all about shareholders and stakeholders? And it's a triple bottom line. So it's people, planet, profit, and it's a circular economy. So what we need is to get the private sector to sit up and listen, and to be motivated to change their behavior, not just greenwashing, which we see all the time and have been seeing for decades, in fact, but serious attention and urgency. We need to educate businesses and their circle of influences. Again, business is a huge sector in the global economy and in Tanzanian economy, and Magufuli wants us to industrialize. So all of these things, but what is the circle of influence that we have over our employees, over our customers, over our supply chain? And so we need to teach businesses what is the real value of nature and what are the real costs of not protecting, sustaining, and rejuvenating her. So the do nothing scenario what is our option, especially given our climate crisis? So to get the ball rolling, I would think that we want to push with business influencers like the CEO Roundtable, of course. So business influencers and social influencers to talk about this and shift the narrative to this new agenda of what is and is not acceptable. And this should be in bite-sized, clear and simple and persuasive language, making the critical business case, which is meaningful. And there must be realistic and achievable impact. So one of the ways is to communicate why doing good for the environment is doing good for humans, the link. We are not outside of our environment. And it needs to be easy, convenient, and feel good, but also translate into the bottom line, not just good PR and brand loyalty, but also through wise cost benefit, highlighting the economic benefits. We need government to provide tax incentives and disincentives and change the current unfriendly CSR investment, which mostly is not tax deductible. So yes, Santina spoke of it shouldn't just be CSR, it's a bigger agenda. So how is the government going to allocate that businesses can then, you know, write off expenses that are definite, investments in sustainability? We need to demonstrate how the botanical garden, for example, and these green corridors in their own right is offering resilience, climate change mitigation, biodiversity, environmental and human health, and well-being benefits, plus their ability to enable a wider development and economy. For example, somebody's mentioned the property investments, you know, go up. Municipal taxes can go up through property rates and taxes going up. So municipal could earn more money and in turn put that money back into more, you know, parks. For success, it's critical that the public or the private sector has faith that this isn't just another tree planting VIP government photo opportunity. When I talk to other businesses, they are so skeptical that there's no real committed agenda to this. And so I talk about it as a tree growing rather than a tree planting. To plant a tree is easy and tomorrow it dies, but tree growing is the methodology we should be using moving forward. And this needs long-term sustainable impact monitoring and evaluation, transparency, accountability, and all these factors need to be engineered into the program. Also, people love success stories. So we need regular media engagement, which are keeping up the interest in this botanical garden, for example, you know, the launch, what's going on, how is it working, is it proving to work, and is it scalable? We also should consider having like a financial instrument that one can invest in, which is rather like a private or government bond, where it's a nature-based asset that has a monetary value, and it has an audit, just like a company has an audit, that we see what are the benefits we're getting from this, and these equal X value. And then this is even a tradable financial implement that you can invest in the botanical gardens, you get a share certificate, and then in 10 years' time, you need to sell it, but it's gone up in value. Now, I know this happens in other countries like the UK. They have a similar thing for forests and investing in forests. So very much we need to show that wild spaces are better kept alive than dead. And such instruments could be a way of doing that. And I just would like to close. I was watching David Attenborough's latest documentary on Netflix last night, and he warns of a man-made disaster on a global scale if we don't take action now. And he says we must restore the planet's biodiversity, the very thing we've been responsible for removing. It's the only way out of this crisis that we have created, and we must rewild the world. If we take care of nature, nature takes care of us. So my favorite hashtag is #HumансBrokeIt and #humans can fix it. So yeah, that's where I'd like to end. Thank you.
Profound statements indeed, Tanya. Thank you very much. And thank you also for that quote from David Attenborough. But what excites me most is that you, both you and Santina, two lady businesswomen, very successful, very committed businesswomen, investing your lives in the city of Dar es Salaam, realize and understand deeply that there needs to be a fundamental ownership by the private sector, taking hands with government. Maybe these are unusual partners to take hands with. Maybe it's a different framework, in a different reality almost, that the private sector moves in and operates in than the public sector. But to make our cities great and to make our cities livable and safe and accessible for people, for planet, for nature, as you say, the triple bottom line, you know, it can be interpreted in many ways, is actually, it's a whole of society effort. And no government with, you know, it's not just about the funds accessible to them and their limitations in that regard, but no government can do this alone. It needs to be the people who live there, the people who work there, the people who invest there. And with leaders like you and Santina in the forefront of the private sector in Tanzania and in Dar es Salaam, makes me very excited about the future of the city, and indeed fills me with hope of what we can do city by city. Yes, we need to switch into another direction very rapidly. Time is short and we don't have but a few years to do this in, but we can do it city by city and cities together, because it's at the local level where these changes can take shape. And from one project like a botanical garden that becomes functional, loved and used by its people, so many green roots can spring and we can grow that tree together. So thank you for those inputs. We've had a question from the floor, and I just wanted to ensure people, this was about the accessibility of this video. So it's not directed to any of our panelists, but it's just to make everybody informed that this session is recorded and it will be live and available for the next 90 days on our website. So you can really go through the portal that you entered and go and check it out through the menu list. Go and check on that menu board. You'll find our session and you can click on it and you can go and watch it. It will also be downloadable and watched and accessible through the ICLEI Africa website for the next 90 days. It should be loaded by tomorrow morning, if not later tonight already. So I want to thank the panel. We're going to come back in our closing remarks, but we now move to a next panel, a very important group of people, our funding organizations. So I am told that Eric Dixon from the World Bank is not with us quite yet, but the rest of the panel, Abbas Kitogo is a practice specialist with BioFin Tanzania, and also Rafael Moser, the UN Capital Development Fund representative, specifically on climate finance for Tanzania. So we have Rafael and Abbas with us. Eric Dixon is going to try and join us later, but we're going to start so long. Abbas, your reflections. It's very important to hear from you guys who specialize in funding and look at projects from a bankability point of view, but also, as Tanya said, from a new economic point of view. People need to think about investment maybe differently as we move into the future and restore nature and people and planet's relationship with one another. So Abbas, from your perspective, what you've seen and heard today so far, please give us your insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just to introduce myself again. My name is Abbas Kitogo. I'm the program specialist here at the UNDP country office in Dar es Salaam. I'm responsible for climate change, energy, extractive sector, and some issues on disaster risk reduction. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me. This is very important, actually, platform. And we really, as UNDP, we really support such kind of initiatives. As UNDP, we are keen to actually see the protection of the nature, but also protection of the environment, but also how communities and governments are actually benefiting from the protection of the natural resources. We are actually integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into the development processes by supporting issues related to policies, institutional frameworks, legal frameworks, and other issues. So this particular initiative in Dar es Salaam is really very important. It's actually one of the issues that we really support at UNDP. And I can share one experience that we supported a similar initiative in Arusha. So what I can say from the perspective of biofilm. Biofilm is a project that we are implementing here at UNDP. It is actually a global project implemented in 36 countries globally. And it is actually looking at helping the governments really to bridge the gap, the financial gaps, to ensure that there is actually enough funding to support the protection of biodiversity. So what we are doing what we call the policy and institutional review to actually understand the legal and the policy framework. And then we do the expenditure review for biodiversity conservation. And then what we do the needs assessment for financing to actually support the biodiversity. And then we come up with the biodiversity finance plan by developing some solutions, including engaging the private sector to actually contribute to the protection of the nature. So this kind of initiative in Dar es Salaam is actually one of the issues that we can be able to actually promote through our biofilm initiative. The example in Arusha, what we did, we received a request from the Nelson Mandela Institute, the University of Nelson Mandela in Arusha, to actually establish the botanical garden in Arusha. So what we did, we actually supported through financing about $100,000 to establish that botanical garden. And that actually happened in like 4 years ago. And the second phase of the initiative was actually completed last year. So now if you go to Arusha, in the premises of the university, you can be able to see the botanical garden. It is actually around 5 acres. And it actually includes, plants and the biodiversity and whatever from the communities, for example, Maasai, from the those plants that cannot easily be accessible, you can be able to find there. And this actually have helped very much to contribute into the availability of rare, medicinal plants that are actually not easily available. So if you go there, you can be able to see. But also the area is now so aesthetic in a way that people can be able to go there and relax. And some students and the researchers actually are conducting the researches there to come up with some very good results, including some researches for protection of, for example, animal pests and others. So it is actually producing very good results so far. And we can see the potential even here in Dar es Salaam if we are able to come up with this one to be able to benefit the same way like in Arusha. For Dar es Salaam, this city is very highly populated in a way. You have too many people. So even this one is actually not enough. We need to have more such initiatives here in Dar es Salaam. That one, I can see the data, the capacity is only 132 people per day, so that is not really enough compared to the population of Dar es Salaam. And if you look at the financial figures, to be sustainable, you need to have too many people actually visiting per day. So we need to have such or similar kind of initiative somewhere in Dar es Salaam. The problem of land, of course, it's an issue, but we have some other locations. I can mention a few. There is one around Mnazi Mmoja. We have an open area there that can also be used. And also somewhere in Temeke, there is a place called Mwembeanga. There's, of course, a an open place that can also be developed to serve the same purpose. So we need to see in the future how this can be scaled up. So generally, we are very much supportive and looking at it from the perspectives of environment and in climate change protection. We are supporting the government in several ways, especially an institutional framework and and other issues to meet the Paris Agreement. So we always try to link what we are doing in the climate area and what is actually happening at the local level. So generally, we are supportive, and I can give an offer financially if we are able to go far to the stage where we can be able to establish that institution, non-profit private institution. UNDP can be able to contribute a little bit of money to actually start or to kickstart the activity, and other partners can come in and contribute. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abbas Kitogo, and thank you for representing UNDP BaFin very, very well here. And yes, I feel your enthusiasm and I share it completely. This is a zoned in small initiative with corridors, with legs, and we saw that on the map. So these green corridors are fundamental, but you are saying, and I agree, we need even more. We need a few green hubs like this. I think, in very developed cities like London, etc., they're talking about the need to be within 10 minutes of walking distance or public transport opportunities of green open space, safe green open spaces for all residents. So if that could be some sort of ideal that we can strive for in a very densely populated city like Dar es Salaam, imagine the quality of life. Imagine how this can actually transform the lives, livelihoods, and just, the daily experience of life and quality of life for millions of people who are flocking to our cities, not only in Dar es Salaam, but elsewhere too. And mind you, I think the beauty of the natural environment in a city like Dar es Salaam is competing with the best out there in the world if we treasure it and if we invest in it. So thank you also for your offer. And certainly I think the people on this call will follow up with you on that. It's great to have UNDP on board and supporting this project. I see that in the meantime, Mr. Eric Dixon from the World Bank has joined us. But I'm going to first go to Rafael Moser. Rafael is, of course, thinking big, large scale, mostly, I think, but also understanding the value of starting small, making a success, and then building on that. Rafael is representing the UN Capital Development Fund of climate finance, specializing in climate finance in Tanzania. And Rafael, your reflections are welcome, please.
Thank you so much, Kobe, and thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this discussion today. So we're really happy to contribute. So I had a chance to have a look at the investment case, and I think I will start by giving some points that I consider as a strong case that would make this case a bankable, a good bankable investment case. So I think by the fact that it focuses, precisely on nature-based solutions, because for urban problems, I think this makes as a bottom line a very strong case. From a climate finance perspective, if we're going to, pledge funds from international vertical funds, I think this is very important because, nature-based solutions, they offer, win-win situations and very local solutions to environmental and also climate change issues, plus the social-economic benefits for the whole chain that is somehow built along the way. So I think that would be the first strong point that I would, highlight. Second, I would also highlight the fact that, the project also includes, engagement and coordination with many stakeholders. And I think this is very important to ensure successful implementation of investment like this one. So ensuring that civil societies participate, private sector, also local government. I'm really happy to see the Ilala Municipal Council representative here today to talk to us. So I think this is very important. And also the business model, based on this PPP approach, I think might also inspire other initiatives across Tanzania, but also in Africa. So I think I could highlight these three. I also had a chance to, go deeper, and I would like to highlight some things that I consider that would make the case stronger from a climate finance perspective. So as I said before, this is linked to the fact that, the engagement with many stakeholders. So I just wanted to highlight again the importance of involvement from the onset of the project to have all the stakeholders involved, and especially local governments, because we have seen in many cases, and to make sure that the planned investment case is also aligned with the local plans, local development plans, because we have seen in many instances cases where public goods and construction works are somehow built, and then after a few months they are rebuilt because there hasn't been coordination among actors. So I think to avoid that and to make sure that is also tuned in the local development plan. So I think it's very important to somehow more explicitly highlight that in the proposal. Also, I think it would be also important, especially when we are seeking pledges from international funds and donors, to somehow align the initiative with the nationally determined contribution, so the NDCs, because of course there will be a lot of environmental benefits here, but also, as I can see from the investment, there are also mitigation and adaptation benefits. So I think those could be further explored in terms of precisely and giving metrics in terms of CO2 equivalent emission reductions and sequestration by sinks, for instance, because we are planting trees as well here. So there will be a lot of contribution in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation, because we are also working across towards increasing adaptive capacity of people that will be working and somehow benefit from the ecosystem services that will be wrapped from the project. Also, I think the use of blended finance schemes is also very important, and I think this is also highlighted in the initiative, and diversification of fund instruments. For instance, using different instruments such as grants, loans, guarantees, and try to diversify that in the capital structure of the project. Because I also noticed that there is a relatively high retained loss, which goes around across 6 years, as I could see from the graph. And I think by diversifying further with the capital structure, maybe we could lower a little bit the retained loss to reduce the years of loss in that sense, and attract and somehow attract financial institutions and investors to come in. And I can say that we do similar. Let's say we support similar projects by working with blended finance schemes. So our approach is really to link local government finance for public goods with what we call the missing link, private investments. So we have cases where we come in with grants. We usually work with performance-based grants to local governments, and we support local governments in mainstreaming climate change, their local development plans. But some of those activities which are identified as a priority at the local level might not be implemented in full by the local government themselves. So in that case, we come in and support project structuring, so providing technical assistance to potential project developers at the local level, so that they can better structure the investment case, so they become a bankable, so they can go to financial institutions and pledge perhaps lower interest rate and have a better loan or interest rates. But we also do provide seed capital grants. So we somehow try to do risk investment. So once we come in by the risk in investment, by supporting the project structuring, by providing seed capital grants, somehow other investors, they feel more attracted and they feel somehow secured in the sense that we have more credibility to the project because we have the institutions which somehow backed up. So I think by looking at the project, I think there is a huge potential to even for UNCDF to be to support in that sense, and I think it would be really open to explore possible collaboration in that area. Thank you so much. I will hand over to Kobe.
Thank you, Rafael. And I think, to those people who've been so deeply embedded in firstly identifying with so many stakeholders this project, I think there were at a stage 7 or 8 projects that were considered, and this one came through on a number for a number of very good reasons. I think they are absolutely delighted to hear what you are saying. So we have UNDP, we've got yourself seeing the potential in this. It's extremely important to us to have a whole of society and also whole of government approach. So we've got government. who've been working hand in hand, who've actually been leading us in terms of identifying this project. And now we see that even the finance institutions are ready to come to the table. Fantastic. Thank you, Rafael. And I think the points that you make here are critically important. A feasibility study is not yet a bankability study. So there are a few steps to be taken. And of course, again, scale does come in. So it doesn't have to be the largest park in the world. I think Montreal, the city of Montreal, is building now the largest urban park in the world. But it could be a replicable model that, because Dar es Salaam is a very spread out city, there could be many of these opportunities for people to engage more with nature, with all the added benefit that you mentioned of climate resilience, etc., mitigation, etc. And again, coming back to the quality of life. Let's now move on. Thank you, Rafael, for those comments. Let's move on to Eric Dixon. Mr. Eric Dixon is the World Bank representative in Tanzania, senior urban specialist at the World Bank. And Eric, we would love to hear from your perspective what your observations are about what you've heard so far, and also about this particular investment case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kobe, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, colleagues, depending on where you are. I hope that, Kobe, you can hear me well. Great, thank you for confirming. A pleasure to be here and to participate in this discussion. And I think that the business case for the Botanical Garden, I think, is testament to a recognized need, as Kobe, you've just said, and has been articulated by Rafael and Abbas before that, about promoting the utility and the value of open spaces, of green spaces in Dar es Salaam, given the scarcity of those types of assets in the city. And so I'm very familiar with the Botanical Garden, and indeed had these discussions some time ago during our Understanding Risk conference, when we began to really look at the greening agenda in a little bit more detail. And so I think that the public good that open spaces offer to the citizens of Dar es Salaam is something that needs to be continually articulated and brought forward in the urban planning discourse. And it is excellent to have Ilala Municipal Council represented here, and to hear Abbas mentioning Mazimoja and the site in Temeke, which I couldn't agree more, are prime locations for revitalization with a green open space lens. And just to pick up on those points, I've been engaged in leading the Dar es Salaam Metropolitan Development Project for the last 5 years here in Tanzania. And that project is, I think, recognized by many for its gray assets, its roads and its drains and its footpaths and bridges and so forth. But a number of years ago, there was an evident moment when we realized that we were not doing enough through that project on open spaces, on greening in Dar es Salaam. And we made a conscious effort to open that discussion and to begin looking at this. And so those places that Abbas mentioned in Ilala and Temeke, and one additional one in Kinondoni, were actually the 3 sites that were selected for a very interesting and dynamic partnership between Ardhi University and the University of Johannesburg to bring together students from landscape architecture and urban planning, and to give them a real life site where they could apply their academics and come up with designs for open spaces and for green spaces for Dar es Salaam that then could be fed into a professional design for future implementation in a future phase of DMDP. And so having these well-known sites, I think, is just an example of the recognition of the opportunity to do more. And in that space, we have been supported through the Nordic Development Fund in DMDP with grant financing to support climate adaptation initiatives. And from this partnership, we began the preparation of what is called the Green Dar Project. It's a sub-project within DMDP, and it's greening for resilience, erosion, environment, and neighborhoods in Dar es Salaam. And I think that the business case that was made on the Botanical Gardens really does trickle through to other areas across the city. We are paving 220 kilometers of roads in the city, but that presents 220 kilometers of opportunity in order to establish guidelines and frameworks for the municipal councils to undertake structured urban greening along urban corridors and then contribute to the climate change mitigation effect to have an effect on urban cooling and indeed the attractiveness of the city. So this is a piece of work that is now advancing, and so we're supporting the preparation of guidelines on erosion management. We're supporting guidelines on roadside greening, as I just mentioned, for what types of trees should be planted at what space, and the water and their maintenance program. We're also supporting guidelines for urban planning support, so that we begin to harness this young pool of Tanzanians that are thinking about urban planning in hopefully a very different way, and injecting it with elements of urban greening, and looking at that from the development space. And very importantly, I think that's one of the elements that is critical, is looking at what assets does the city have at its disposal currently, and how can we help grow that? And I'm referring specifically to detention ponds that can be adapted into multi-use spaces. I'm referring to the municipal nurseries that perhaps can be supported in order to really have a supply, consistent supply effect of greening for the city. And we're undertaking a pilot tree database in order to understand, what does the city currently have and how can we grow it. So I think I'll stop there, Kobe, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, and I've also been involved in, for many years, the discussions around the Msimbazi, which for those of you that are familiar or not, is a flood-prone area that many years ago was an urban space that has been converted increasingly into a very hazardous area. And by undertaking integrated design that looks at engineering, that looks at urban planning, but that looks at greening, there's an opportunity to bring one of the largest parks, if not the largest park in East Africa, to Dar es Salaam, and give that public good back to the city that so desperately needs these spaces. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric, for those this rich information, in fact, that you shared with us about so many projects that the World Bank is supporting and engaging in across the city, and of course across the whole country as well. And again, making the point that Temeke and Kinondoni and the other municipal authorities, are equally well suited, very well suited for projects like this as well. And I think, if we put our heads together, the people in this call here sharing your insights here, we can make things happen. I believe we each come with our own strengths and different insights and so on. And if this project works, if it goes forward, we're going to need a little support to make it happen. The plans are there now. Now we need to make sure that it goes ahead. But I think it can spark a lot of future action. And if you just think about the rich biodiversity that actually exists in Dar es Salaam, and how removed our urban dwellers can become of that nature all around them. It's almost like one tends to think of cities pushing nature out, but many other cities are doing a lot of effort and spending a lot of resources to bring nature back in. And one such example that just springs to mind to me is a city-state like Singapore. Singapore started off with their wonderful work at their National Botanical Gardens, also around botanical gardens, as a matter of fact, started talking about nature in a city, within nature. And then later on, it changed to nature in a city, and then back again to a city in nature. And now they're talking about Singapore, the garden city, and the city in a garden, so they've completely transformed the way they think about bringing nature into pockets. And that's what they started doing, restoring pockets, but soon it became the very fabric of the society and the very fabric of the culture of Singapore. And what a great example of how to really live in harmony with nature. And if you take nature away out of Singapore now, there will be no Singapore. So it's also an attraction. It's also it puts you on a competitive edge as a city if you really embrace nature and mainstream nature across your city. As you expand your infrastructure, do it in ways that's compatible and really enhancing nature and the richness. I just was astounded to see how many species, little primate species and so on, are still out there and can still be brought back into the lives of people who live in Dar es Salaam. So thank you for making the point that it works already in other parts of the city and it can work here as well. So we're now going to I also wanted to maybe come back just to very quickly to Rafael. There's been a question, Rafael, before we go to the last panel, and indeed Ilala will be talking then, about the lessons that you've learned around PPPs. You mentioned that you're pleased to hear this is an example of a public-private sector partnership, but we know that there may be many pitfalls in there. Can you very briefly, just in a minute or so, share with us what would be the main red lights one should be looking out for if you go into PPPs?
Right. Yes. So I think, as I said before, I think, to have all the stakeholders involved since the beginning. So I think it's very important, especially for, developers that would make it, find it hard to go to financial institutions and get, favorable financial instruments. So I think you really need someone backing up. So this is from our experience. So in cases where the UNCDF contribution is really to come in and de-risk investments, because otherwise these developers wouldn't make it by themselves just by simply going to these financial institutions. So I think as a starting point, I would advise to somehow try to identify those potential institutions that could work together with this project developer to de-risk, perhaps by providing seed capital grants to somehow de-risk the whole the remainder of the capital structure in that project. And I think from our experience, once we do that, so once we come in and de-risk and provide the technical assistance to really provide the project structuring and get to the investment ready stage, the rest is really, it becomes easier to somehow unlock and attract further investments. So I think I would give that kind of advice to really look for institutions that there are several examples. Even I think also I know that the World Bank does so. That could also be become a key partner for this project.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think we're going to take you up on your offer as well. So yeah. Thank you very much for those insights. We're now moving to our third panel, which is actually a one-person panel, but a very important panel. The most important panel here today is the local government itself. And it is represented, Ilala municipality, as we say, it's one of 6 municipalities that in Dar es Salaam. Ilala is the municipality in which the botanical gardens are situated. And we are represented here by Mr. Abdon Mapunda, who is the head of the Department of Environmental Conservation and Solid Waste Management of Ilala municipality. Mr. Mapunda, we've heard a lot about this project now and also comments on the project and the investment case as such. Please, can we have your reaction as the local government that will be in charge of this project as it moves forward?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me in this session of Invest Case of Nature Benefit in Dar es Salaam. As you said, my name is Mr. Abdon Mapunda. I'm head of Department of Environment and Waste Management here in Ilala. The presenters have presented the importance of urban nature. We have seen a lot of them, have discussed a lot on that nature, but myself, I tried to look on where we are coming from until today, because myself, I've experienced almost 17 years. I'm working with Ilala Municipal as an environmental management officer. So I know the situation and the rapid changing of the city. Yeah, we have a population rate of increasing population of 4.6 every year, and we have a population almost 600 people here in Dar es Salaam. And we, Ilala, we have a population of 1 million people, 1,400,000 people. All these depend on the urban nature, and the nature is very important. And we as a government, as Ilala local authorities, we know that these people, they need to get fresh air, they need to get a place to do recreation, they need a place where they can get a training on the education matters, to promote local tourism, and there's so many things on that. So in our budget, we are allocating some money, some fund for making rehabilitation of this urban nature. And also not only that, but also we do many activities to make sure that these urban green spaces are maintained. But you know, as a local government, as a municipality, we don't have enough fund to make sure that we invest in these urban nature, because we have many priorities. We have education priorities, healthy, road infrastructure, and the like. And once you come to invest in urban, to invest in green spaces and urban nature, it have got less priorities. As you know, the board of directors we have is a councillors. Councillors, they should be very aware on the nature, how you can maintain them, make a decision to allocate fund for that. So it becomes very difficult sometimes for them to understand well, but we tried a lot to make them to know what is nature and what is environment and the way how we do it. But nowadays, they understand on this because, first of all, the government set a PPP Act of 2010, which is amended also in 2018, where it allowed the private sector to engage fully on making sure that the investment in nature is doing. But not only that, in our municipal bylaws, we created a place where to engage private sector to help in investing in nature. But also, we do memorandum of understanding between private sectors and the government to make to maintain these open spaces, gardens, and the like. So at this particular time, we have a direction on what to do in maintaining these open spaces and the urban nature. And there is a lot of engagement of private sector. For example, the ICLEI came do some study here to identify some areas in the smart atlas, thematic atlas. We did a lot. We identified the green spaces here in Dar es Salaam, and we produce a map to show that this area is important to make investment for that. For the case of botanical garden, that one we are discussing now, we Ilala, we are ready to make sure that this area should be invested and should be become a very good area, like different from now how it used, because previously there's a different species of plants, species of big trees there. There's different nurseries, different everything, but nowadays it's not there because we give less priority for that area. So engagement of private sector on that area, it will be helpful to municipal to make sure that these areas are beautiful, this area become a good botanical garden and also good in nature. So people, they will go to train, to relax, to recreational area. So we need that support to make sure that they rehabilitated and come into good fashion. That's the things.
I think I think we are losing connection there with Mr. Mapunda. But thank you very much, Mr. Mapunda, for those remarks. It's great to hear that commitment. Are you back? Do you want to conclude?
Yeah. What I'm saying,
please.
Yes. What I'm saying, I'm happy because I know the situation of municipal nowadays, because we don't have enough funds to make sure that these areas are rehabilitated and become a good area for urban investment. So we need support, we need everything. So we are ready to cooperate to make sure that these things are coming into being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mapunda. Thank you. And you're back now. We can see you and hear you clearly as well again. So it's great to hear that we have the commitment and support from our local government leaders. And it's also great to know that, you know, with the work that we've been doing and that many others are doing in mapping the natural assets and in really digging in how we can develop a city like Dar es Salaam and specifically the municipalities within it with credible data and deep dive data on the value of the natural assets. That's incredibly important, and the recognition for that data to help decision making is also very valued. So thank you very much, Mr. Mapunda, for your support to this initiative, and it's always a pleasure for ICLEI to work with you and Ilala Municipality to work on a sustainable, great city for everybody to live in harmony with nature. So we are now moving to the final section of this meeting, and I want to introduce to you a person who's been heavily involved in nature-based solutions, in valuing nature, the original ecosystem assessment processes around the value of ecosystems, etc., was a big passion and still remains a big passion of him. I'm introducing to you Mr. Augustin Berghofer from Germany, Leipzig. He is a researcher and scientific advisor at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig, Germany. Augustin works across the world on projects just like this, and Augustine's got a wealth of knowledge that he can bring to the table from his global work, but also in a long journey spanning over a good number of years with us, working in Dar es Salaam, looking at the natural capital assets and the environmental assets of the city and how we can enhance and actually sustainably develop them. So Augustine, I would like for you to reflect a little on this session and also draw on your experiences on the economics of ecosystems. You've done a lot of work in that space from the early TEEB days. And also, Mr. Mapunda mentioned specifically the thematic atlas that together with you, ICLEI developed under the Interact Bio project, the thematic atlas on natural assets in Dar es Salaam. Maybe you can expand a little bit on that as well. So Augustine, from a scientific point of view, and from a global experience point of view, your assessment of what you've heard and seen today, and also your experience in working on the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kobe. Thank you everyone for joining in this session. And for me, Kobe, it was a great pleasure during these years to work with your team, your great team on the Interact Bio project in thinking about what could be a suitable format for presenting environmental information to authorities and the wider public in such a way that it is appealing and engaging and interesting for a wider audience. That was the basics idea and the starting point for developing this thematic atlas. Now, I think there's some information on this atlas. In a nutshell, it's we try to identify which urban green spaces in the greater metropolitan region of Dar es Salaam are of importance for the different types of societal dependencies on nature. So for secure water provision, for protection against coastal flooding or disaster risks, for cooling effects, for recreational purposes, but also for jobs, income, agriculture. So we identified different themes and topics and identified then different areas which are of major relevance for these broader societal interests in nature. And perhaps this sounds like big science, but the I like very much about this project is that this wasn't a big research project, but basically what we did is we said, with the limited research and data that is available and the limited capacities we have available within the context of this project, because it's essentially an environmental cooperation project and not a research project, can we still come up with some meaningful interpretation? And that was very encouraging to see that even with limited information, but with an ecosystem services perspective, one can really come up with very interesting messages. So I think it can be found on the website and on the Interact Bio project site. So if you browse through the thematic atlas, maybe you find some inspiring information on this. Now, Kobe and your team, you've asked me to come up with some closing remarks or reflections on what we have listened to today, because this is now the business case for the botanical garden. And maybe I can shortly share what I take home from this. So first of all, I think what Martin Jansen von Wuren presented us is a very interesting example because it's so concrete and so illustrative. There are so many different types of benefits from a very limited area of green space, which is highly biodiverse, which is the botanical garden. So we talk about recreation, but also about genetic reservoirs, about cooling air quality, about the importance for residents as well as for tourists. So there's all kinds of aspects involved which go far beyond what would be typically within the interest of ecologists. Yeah, the botanical garden is quality of life for people living in a densely populated area. Now, Santina Benson and Tanya Hamilton, you shared with us the vision saying getting engaged in conservation of urban green areas or quality spaces is much more than CSR. It's about actually taking care of also of business performance, not only in profit, but also in social terms. And what I take home from your interventions was to say there's a need for better understanding and better communicating these links between nature and people or nature and business performance. And I think this is something we can learn from, because trying to understand the linkages and trying to understand the dependencies is what moves people and interests people. In the second panel, Abbas Kitogo, you mentioned that there is a huge need for scaling up recreational space. And I think this is really an important take-home message. If we consider that the urban population in Africa, we did some recent estimates on this, and will probably triple within the coming decade. So we speak about 1.5 billion people in Africa living within cities. This is just incredible, yeah? If we talk of 40,000 visitors for the botanical garden, we already have 6 million people living today in the whole of Dar es Salaam metropolitan region, and large areas of that region are unplanned, so there are no botanical gardens there. This brings us also to the fact that green space is has a highly social dimension to it. It's not only business performance, it's not only ecological performance or resilience in terms of environmental hazards, but it's the social dimension that poor neighborhoods have the least means to cope with environmental stress. In that sense, cooling effects, air purification effects of urban green space is of tremendous social importance, because it improves the quality of life of those who cannot afford to cope and struggle with environmental hazards. Rafael Moser, you mentioned that there's high potential in aligning with climate policies, climate adaptation, mitigation, climate finance. I think this is a very important topic, which there's huge potential in better connecting biodiversity and climate thinking. There's a lot about discussion about this can be done at international level. I think at local and national level, there's still huge scope in enhancing this. Eric Dixon, you mentioned that there is a need to recognize the utility of public goods. And I think this is important. The green space offers some private benefits, but it offers also broader public benefits. And to get this nicely sorted out between the public and the private nature of the different types of benefits, this is something important. Abdul Makunda, you mentioned that there's this need of healthy environmental conditions, and this was reconfirmed, yeah. But you also told us that you as local government are actively cooperating with the private sector already, and this is something I think which is the way to go. And so, as a closing, let me just see. Yeah, two last reflections on this. I think it's not only about private-public cooperation, it's also public-public cooperation. So we have to think more about how can we get public health, water, roads and transportation, other governance sectors that also operate in the urban space, get them convinced that co-investing in green space and aligning their activities so that it doesn't affect green space negatively is extremely useful. There's huge potential there. We can't just, like, on the one hand, build and build and build with lots of public money, and on the other hand, try to compensate for all the impacts of unsustainable building dynamics to try to make up for the loss. So let's rather start and build this in an integrated manner. I think, Eric, you also mentioned this. And lastly, of course, preventing green infrastructure loss is in most cases cheaper than living with the consequences of that loss. I think this is something we need to communicate much better. And my last sentence regarding the park itself, I think the benefits are very obvious. The amount of money is comparatively $120,000. That's not so enormously much money for the benefits we're talking about. I think what it comes down now, what it boils down now, is really to set the incentives and the organizational structure to actually run this well. And it's easy on the paper to see that it's highly beneficial to invest, but it's much more difficult to get this organized in such a way and to have the structures and the incentives for those working on this, that it actually becomes a reality. And maybe we as NGOs and the public sector should become more interested in learning from the private sector and how this could be run efficiently. Thanks very much, Kobe, and everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Augustine, and thank you also for the summary and your sharing your insights. And as Augustine says, you can really just go on Google and Google Interact Bio or the ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center. You can download the thematic atlas for Dar es Salaam, but also the thematic atlases we did in other countries in Brazil and in India as part of the Interact Bio project, and so many other resources that came out of the Interact Bio project. One such initiative, of course, is Cities with Nature, which is also, you can simply go and Google Cities with Nature. That's a global initiative, but it came from these cities that united under their Interact Bio project. And Cities with Nature today has close on 200 cities around the world, including cities like London, Los Angeles, Dar es Salaam, of course, is right there as well, Johannesburg, large, small cities across the world, really, who are all united together in working together to mainstream biodiversity, to make their cities live with nature, to create the opportunities for the urban communities to not be alienated and disconnected from nature, but also to understand the multiple benefits of planning and shaping your buildings, your roads, your stormwater systems, everything, all the basic services with nature. Nature-based solutions are often right in front of us, and they are often not very intense and engineer intense specifically, and not that costly, and they last, they are sustainable. Coming back to some of the comments that Tanya also made earlier. So I want to thank everybody very much for joining us today, and specifically also, if you allow me, the team from ICLEI, Cities Biodiversity Center, that worked on this. And I'm not going to name everybody, but really Ingrid Kutsia, Anita van Wyk, and Nakara Made, you were real champions in championing this work. Ryan Kutsia, so many others, Kirsty Robinson, many, many people, Jessica Kavanich, so many of them worked for very, very long days, months, years, in fact, on many aspects. We've highlighted one aspect, and this is this investment case. But what we saw here today is huge uptake in this investment case. So I'm afraid it's not the end of the journey. Martin, you've sparked something here, and it's actually just the beginning of a journey of the botanical gardens, the reshaping, revitalization of the botanical gardens, the green corridors. I'm confident that with the private sector, with the public finance sector that we were speaking with, and with the support of the city itself, we are going to make this botanical garden project a reality in no time. And at the same time, look at scaling up and scaling out across the city. And then I can think of other cities like Entebbe and so many other cities across Africa that are so ripe for an initiative like this. So let's hope this is the spark of many, many great things to come, where we provide safe, attractive, and multiple beneficial public green open spaces for our residents that are going to flock to our cities in the future and those who already live there. I want to thank everybody who've joined the session, and in particular also pay tribute to our funders, the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy from the German government through the ICI project for Interact Bio, which has made this work possible. Please do visit the Cities Biodiversity Center of ICLEI for more information, and visit our LOCS lounge on this site that you are on at the moment for a downloadable version of this presentation. All the PowerPoint presentations and this entire session has been recorded there and will be available for you to share and revisit. I want to thank all the panelists. It was wonderful to have the World Bank, UNDP, the Capital Fund, so many of our partners there, and absolutely, ladies from the private sector, you rock, and you've got it right. If the private sector's heart is where it is, as you said it is today, we're in a good space, and this gives me great hope for the future of Africa's urban shared future. I want to thank everybody and wish you well, and remind you, please join us tomorrow as we close a 2-week marathon Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress, our 5th one, the first virtual one. Our closing plenary starts at 1 p.m. South African time tomorrow, and it is going to be a show, and it's going to be a commitment place you do not want to miss. I hope to see all of you here. Thank you very much. Thank you and goodbye.